All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be a great podcast today. I'm sitting here with Joe Amini, and we've actually had a ton of conversation before the podcast, so I'm super excited, just to hear his story. He's a leader in the community. We've tried to set up this podcast for a little bit. I had technical difficulties before, and finally got him here in studio. So right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, Joe, for the people that don't know you, you're well known in the community. I've spoken to a couple people that I had you coming on the podcast, and they were really excited. But for the people that don't know you, I want to take your story all the way back. I want to talk about, where were you born and raised? What were you like as a kid? Influences from sports, or, just kind of like help me understand the Joe that was growing up in the world. And then, we'll slowly build to your story today.
That's awesome, James. Man, I'm looking forward to this. Been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I will try to give you a good visual of where I was born and all the way to where we are at today as we start our conversation. So I was actually born in the Middle East, 1979. If you would know what's going on in 1979 in the Iran area, that's where I was born. That's right when we had the Shah and Khomeini change of power to happen there, and we had the embassy that was attacked over there and all of that. Well, my family had to get out of that area, really out of immediately. So we left as refugees and ended up in Italy. My mom is Italian, my dad is Iranian. So we had a Catholic upbringing and a Muslim upbringing all at the same time. So really dinner tables was talking Italian to mom, which sat to the left, and to the right we talked Persian to dad, which was always kind of fun growing up as we did that for a while. But then we did all kinds of traveling, and people always ask, like, oh, was that a lot of fun? And well, what we didn't know about my dad is that he was actually a professional con artist. And he would cheat people left and right all the way through our lives. And when we lived in Italy, I remember one time we had to escape out of the fire escape of our apartment because there's men at the door with guns trying to find my father. So we got out of Italy, lived in Turkey and Austria for a while, and finally ended up in the United States in about 1987. And this is before 9/11, obviously, and all of that. So before 9/11, what would happen is Catholic churches would sponsor people to come over to the United States. So we were sponsored to come over to the United States, lived in the Hamtramck area for a year or so, and then ended up on the east side of Detroit. And this is probably where my mom and dad finally split up. This is their major split up point where dad kind of disappeared eventually, and mom went on her own way there. And it was really kind of a hard moment in history for me, especially. Loved my dad, man. Most boys love their dads, right? So that's me. I love my dad, wanted to spend time with him, and he would try to spend time with me, but honestly kept just lying and same thing. And it was really interesting too, talk about abuse. My dad beat me, which is really interesting because I was really fascinated with wanting connection with him, but my connection always ended up with either emotionally abuse or physical abuse, but there's still something drawing me there to my father. Eventually, I split from my dad. This was about 13, 14 years old, and I became super angry, just angry guy. And finally one guy, this guy named John, really dear friend of mine, eventually said to me, he said, why are you so angry? What is wrong with you? And honestly, James, at that point, it was just a start of a conversation. What I recognized was what's inside of me boiling up is not right, but I didn't deal with it at all. I just knew it wasn't right. And Josh, one of these guys that really started paying attention. At the time I had hair, I'm a bald guy today, but at the time I had hair, and Josh was like, hey man, can I cut your hair once a month? Would that be all right? So Josh started hanging out with me and started connecting one-on-one with me. So we started with a haircut, and then Josh said, hey, you play arcade games, right? And I'm like, oh, I love some arcade games. He said, remember Street Fighter, James, back in the day?
Yes, I do.
So we started going to the arcade after a haircut to play some Street Fighter. And then Josh hey, man, I love me some Wendy's. Can we get some Wendy's afterwards? So now we had haircuts, Street Fighter, and Wendy's. And eventually, through this process of this, Josh started asking me questions about, like, he said, hey, man, tell me about, like, where would you go if you died today? Like, what would happen in your journey? And tell me about that. So I'm a guy at the time that, although my mom was Catholic and dad was Muslim, I had an idea that, like, I was set on earth, I'm created, and I had a thought of that, but still a lot of anger, a lot of brokenness there. So through this relationship with Josh, I started understanding, like, hey, I'm made for a purpose. What's my purpose? What's my design here on earth? Eventually that led me to a faith of believing in Jesus and walking through the journey of that and what that meant for me.
There's actually a ton that I want to ask you about because you already have a fascinating origin story. Fascinating. Because one of the things that, and you alluded to it a little bit, but all boys, well, at least in my experience, have a certain admiration and love for their father. That is your father. Like, my father was in my eyes as a child, was an infallible superhero because it was my father. Like, no matter what evidence there was of the contrary, in my mind, like, no, that's my dad. And, like, we all have that certain amount of, like, love and admiration. But now you were dealing with such a duality of, you have this loving, or this image of your father that you love and you adore and you admire, but then the actual actions are so far detached from what a loving leader like father should be. And obviously looking back now, you see where the anger comes from. But as a child, that had to be so hard to navigate because you just want acceptance, love, and all the best qualities from this man that was literally responsible for your creation, and you're not getting that. You know what I mean? So when your father leaves the house, you said it was like 13, 14, he goes out. You're living with mom full time then?
Right, yep.
Now, did that make you have to, like, step up and kind of be the man of the house? Did that make you, at an early age, when you haven't even figured out who you are, you haven't figured out your place in the world yet? Thank God it sounds like you have one person that you're starting to confide in, you're developing a real relationship for, somebody gives a shit about you besides just your parents, and you're like, man, like, I value this person. Whether we're eating Wendy's or getting a haircut, like, I value this person. I can tell just by your story that you had a lot of emotion for this person. It was an important part, right? Yeah. So let's talk about, you have to be in the man of the house role at a very young age, not even really knowing what that means. What was that period like, and what do you think actually led to the self-discovery? Because you started to allude to self-discovery. That's why I wanted to stop you, because you went through all of this negative pain, difficulty. You're moving all over. You have two different religions presented to you. You have a very negative influence from your father, but you have a good image of what a father should be. So I want to dig a little bit more into the psychology of that, because we see countless struggling kids in our community, and we always want to help them. You were at a crossroads in your life. You could have become angry, destructive, a con artist, a terrible person yourself, or you could have found a way to differentiate that, like, that's not me, and then go a better route, which obviously you've taken. Let's talk about that time a little bit more in depth before we go forward.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for stopping us there. So I would pause by saying, I think, as, again, a person of faith, I believe prayer has a lot to do with it. And I think my mom early on was a person that did pray a whole lot. And I don't know, James, have you ever met a woman that you're like, she's incredibly strong? Like this, my mom was stronger than your average bear. And I'll tell you, my mom died of cancer, breast cancer, almost 20 years ago now. And when my mom had cancer for 5 years, she would literally go do chemo in the morning and be sick and all that, and then go work at a gas station for about 12 hours while throwing up in between customers just because she had to put food on the table. My mom was the kind of gal that stole food to feed us. Matter of fact, James, there's a story where my mom walks into a store and she couldn't steal canned foods because they were looking at her. She figured if she go up to the counter, you know, where the candy used to be below the counter, she could grab the candy and put it in her pocket and walk out. So she does this, but she's so convicted that when she got her welfare check at the time, she went back to the store and confessed and paid them back for the candy that she stole for us to feed us. And candy wasn't a good treat. It was like, you got to eat this or you won't have any nutrition in you. So early on, what I started seeing was that this was important. So my mom, I started working when I was 10 years old because my mom said, hey, you got to come to work with me. So I started working as a bottle boy at the age of 10. And this time, again, my dad's still around a little bit, but I started going to work with her and working about a few hours. My mom worked at the gas station, and we did that for a while. And eventually, James, how that changed was Mom just said, hey, guys, what I can do is I can put food on the table, and I can make sure that the house, the walls of the house are here. But you guys got to kind of take care of everything else. My little brother's really young. My sister's a year and a half older than I am. So her and I just started kind of providing at a very young age for our own clothes on our backs, and all those type of things. And at some point, actually, my sophomore year of school, I decided I want to go to a private school. So I worked about 40 hours a week and went to high school. But I paid my way through high school because I felt convicted that I wanted to go to a private school and get a different education. I grew up in the east side of Detroit, so the school options that I had at the time wasn't ones that I wanted. I wanted to change my schooling options a little bit. Some of that had to do with sports. I wanted to play soccer also, and I was only offered at private schools at the time. And I also wanted to learn about the Bible, which was offered again at a private school and such. So started walking through that process a little bit. But I think early on, what separated that was when I got angry and saw anger in my dad, what I saw also was compassion for my mother. And I saw I needed to change the narrative. Matter of fact, throughout my life, been married almost 20 years this July, and throughout my life, that's kind of been the journey of like, I need to raise these kids differently, I need to love my wife differently. What does that look like? So when the anger started for a while, and this happens to all of us, right? Anger for a while actually motivates. It actually pushes us past our pain to an other side. So when people tell me they're angry about something, it's like, let's challenge that anger. Let's take that and send it somewhere. And when my dad started to kind of really hurt me, I took that anger and said, okay, how am I going to change the narrative? Okay, he's a bad worker. He has no work ethic, which caused him to be a con artist. So I decided early on I was going to have a really, really great work ethic, and I was going to make my boss really proud of him. Matter of fact, my boys, who both are in the workforce now, when they leave the house to go to their employer, I always tell them, hey, be a blessing to your employer. That's your goal today. Your employer needs to look at you and say, I am blessed because you are here. And that's been my motto. I've always had bosses that would say, hey, man, you always really are a joy to be here. You try to work hard. And that's been part of a way of changing my dad's narrative. So early on, I had to step up with that. My mom died when my sister and I, my sister was like 19, I'm 18. And so my little brother is about 13 years old when she dies. There's no other family around. So we became caretakers. Really, my sister's a legal caretaker of my brother at the time. But we started to raise this guy and started the process of what does that look like to, as teenagers, really, honestly, raise another teenager, and what would that look like? And so early on, one of the things we did for him is we said, you will never have an excuse that your mom died. That will not be an acceptable excuse. We get it. It sucks. This is your deck of cards that you've been dealt. Time to deal with it. And we started helping him do that. He went to the same private school I went to, and they were a great support in Clinton Township there, and really loved him really well through that process. And we've had different stories there and all of that. But I think how we grew through that challenges was that we weren't going to let the cards dealt with us dictate our future. And a lot of it, again, has to do with faith for me in a lot of ways, but also I think has to do with a personality of like, I am responsible for me. No one else is responsible for me in that process.
So when you were young, the faith came from your mother, like you saw her praying, you saw her putting her belief in something higher, and you found solitude or like comfort in that same thing. You said, hey, this is the cards I'm dealt. They do suck. Like, it isn't fair. But what can I do about it? How can I change this cycle? How can I, as a child, I mean, you're a kid raising a kid, but you're trying to do the best you can for your little sibling, you know, that could have easily fallen into that victimhood of like, well, this happened to me, so now that means the rest of my life has to be terrible, which is not true. Yeah. We can come back from failure and like my mother committed suicide when I was young, and it's like, these are things that is just the life that you have to live with. And if you sit around and spend all your energy wanting to change it or wanting it to be different until we invent a time machine, it's just the reality that we have. The question is, what can we do from right now to move forward? So your mother passes away and your father completely steps out of the picture at this point, or did he try to come back in when that takes place? Because I'm trying to understand a man that, like, your wife passes away, the mother of your children, even if you're not together with her, your children now have one of their parents gone. And I think no matter what level, bottom of the barrel person you are, you'd have to be like, now my children need me. Like, I don't know how that's not an unbelievable wake-up call, a spark to be better. Some people need to fall on extreme tragedy to finally bring out the person they should have been. Does your father come back into the picture at all? Or is he literally just letting you kids try to live in this world by yourselves? And, like, you put yourself through private school just by your own work ethic? I mean, that's amazing. So does the father come back into the picture at this point, or does he stay out and you and your sister literally take charge?
Yeah, he stays out. We didn't know at the time. So at the age of 14, I guess I was the last straw for him. So when I pushed him away at the age of 14, which is about 5 years before mom passed, he checks out. And what we didn't know at the time is he actually goes back to Iran and tries to live life in Iran without his passport or anything. So you can imagine what that was like. So he, according to what we found out a bunch of years later, is he was arrested at the airport and captured by the Iranian police and locked up. So he didn't know mom died until he called me when I was about 23 years old. And there's a journey there. We'll talk about that in a minute, because I eventually started dealing with anger. And so I'm still pretty angry. I'm about to be a young married guy, so we'll talk about that, because that's pretty good content for us to get into. So I think Dad had no idea of any of that happening. Really, he leaves, officially divorced, he's gone, and mom gets cancer maybe about 6 months after all of that. So he had no knowledge she was sick, from at best we know, unless he obviously found out some other way besides us. So what happened at raising my little brother, at some junction, I'm dating this gal I married, Angela, my wife, and so we start a life together, her and I, and we include the whole family. It's a family affair. We're all like in the process of living life together and learning what that is like. But man, this anger is just like, although I have faith in Jesus at the time, I'm going to church, I'm studying the Bible, I'm leading people, I'm doing the things that I'm called to do. I'm working every day. I'm in construction. So after I graduated high school, I do a camp ministry for a little while, but as mom got sicker, I had to go back home to help provide. So I hop in construction. I spent about 16 years in the construction trade. And as I'm in the construction trade and all of this process, I'm just an angry guy. Like, something will go wrong, and I just blow up. Anger's showing up at home. Never touched my wife, never touched my kids, none of that. But I broke a fair share of cabinet doors. I slammed a few doors. I've yelled. I've done a lot of that. So anger has been one of these things that I've constantly dealt with. And also, like, I don't know if you study the Enneagram or any of that stuff. I'm an Enneagram 8, so I'm like a challenger. So I'm already a person that's like already a little bit pushy, right? You can't just tell me no. I'm gonna be like, what do you mean no? So I'm gonna lean in a little bit always in that conversation. So as I start dealing with this anger a little bit, it's manifesting itself in different ways and such. So I started seeing a therapist through the process and started saying, hey, you gotta help me understand this. Like, I don't want to lose my wife. And the big one for me, honestly, James, was I don't want to be like my father. I don't want to be like him. And these are sins that he gave me. And I 100% believe that. The way you and I live our lives is we give people other sins they can bring along with them. So one of the things I recognize is my dad gave me stuff. He gave me sins that I had the opportunity to deal with. And as I'm dealing with this conversation with a counselor, part of the reason that started the process of talking to a counselor was my wife tells me I'm pregnant. And although I'm excited, I'm scared. I don't want to hit my kids. I don't want to be a bad dad. I don't want to be a disconnected dad. How do I do this? And what anger started to also show itself is I became a workaholic. I became a guy that wanted to succeed and provide. So my hard working became a little bit of a workaholic in the process there. And I say a little bit, but man, I was probably pushing 60, 70 hours a week, just trying to provide the best way I knew how. Eventually I launched into a business, but
Is this because you're just trying to keep the brain occupied? Like you have to be doing something so you don't reflect, so you don't go back over the pain, so you don't like is that why you're so dialed in and driven to like, oh, I need to be working, I need to be doing this? And then I want to talk about the step of you going to therapy, because there's a lot of people in this world that there's a lot of psychological growth that needs to take place, but they never take that first step, whether they, classify it as like, oh, that's weak if I go to therapy, or that's this or that. You made the right step. You said, hey, I have something that I don't fully understand, that has a control over me that I'm not proud of, that can make me be a version of myself that I don't want to exist in this world. And I'm going to work to change that for my wife, for myself, for my children, for my future, to not be like my father. You even saying those words, like I had to make sure I wasn't going to be like my father. That's a profound realization to say like, hey, despite any of those good things that, a son feels for his father, I have to look at the man he actually is and say, I will not be that man to my children. I'm going to break that cycle. So I want to talk about like when you made that jump, because most people, they're angry, they go drink. They'll get drunk every weekend. They'll never deal with it. They'll point externally at all the things that make them angry, not realizing the anger is actually here and you're just finding reasons to be angry.
Yeah.
How did you make that jump? Talk about the changes that it made in you, and then, how your life started to change as you were different.
Yeah. I think early on, what I started realizing, James, is we're not meant to live this life alone, right? You guys fight here. You guys do amazing stuff. My son trains next door, and what I realized about fighting world is you don't go at it alone, although you're in the ring alone. You have a whole community. So when my son fights in Taekwondo, Master Perez is at his chair telling him what to do, telling him how to do it. So when that Josh guy we talked about a while ago, when Josh started connecting with me, Josh had a limit of what he could do, right? What Josh could do is point it out. He could point out the limp. And I believe all of us leave limps on each other. We leave scars, good and bad, right? Like there's things that this conversation, man, that I'm going to leave enriched. And there's potentially what someone might hear about this conversation later, and they might be like, oh, I don't know if I like that. And that's okay. We do that for each other. We leave good things and bad things on each other. So when Josh started saying, hey, man, you have a limp that you need to pay attention to, and I'm not the guy to help you limp it. But what I did early on is I realized that life meant to be in community, and I know there's people on this earth that are trained to help me think and process these things. So as I started walking through the counseling thing, the one thing I had to realize real quick is I don't have these answers. And just like I started our conversation earlier today about how you did a bunch of research, and I had to do research on this. I had to get down to like the core of who I am. So I'll tell you, the first therapist I went to sucked. I ain't gonna lie. I mean, this person was just not bright. Like, just not a very smart person. And probably in the wrong field, if I'm honest with you. But some therapy, I think they do that. They try to deal with the symptoms. They try to deal with like, oh, you're angry? Just count to 10. Okay, I'm going to count to 10 and come over there and slap you. Like, that's the conversation I wanted to have. Like, really? Like, and that's what this person kept dealing with was they kept dealing with these ideas of like, hey, when you slam the door, instead of slamming the door, snap your fingers. I'm like, does that ever work for anyone? Like, it doesn't work, like, So I did that for a while with this particular therapist. And then I felt like I left enough with like vitamins, if that makes sense. I left with enough vitamins to say, okay, I'll try these things you put in place. So me and my wife would fight. My anger would spike to high degrees. I would go for a walk. Well, guess what? I would come back after the walk and still be pretty mad. Like I went for a 2-mile walk, but I'm still angry. And or maybe for this one conversation, I was able to like come back with like, okay, I think this can work or this can work. So I started walking through that, and eventually I found a therapist that didn't care about the symptoms. This person actually said, I don't care about any of that. You can act out all you want. Tell me what's going on inside of you. What's going on deep inside of you, underneath the water, well below the ocean. Tell me about your stomach. When you get mad, what's your stomach telling you? And I started dealing with this idea of like abandonment issues that I was dealing with for my father. Matter of fact, being mad that another man hit me. Like I'm a grown man now, still angry that when I was a kid, another man put his hands on me. And like, I did nothing about it. That's the problem. That was the problem, right? The problem is like, I feel like inside of me, I'm a fighter. I'm a guy who wants to push back. And in this particular season of my life, I let a grown man touch me, and he still had his dignity when he walked away. And I'm like, why did I allow that?
It's like that humiliation that you were feeling had lasted for so long because you had never confronted it. When it's like, when you look at it objectively and just as the truth, it was an adult, you were a child, there was an authority figure, you were not yet. It was someone that was supposed to love you that was doing the opposite. So the truth can like break down all the illusions. The truth can break down the humiliation story that was playing in your head all those years about I should have done this, I should have done that. Maybe you were just not capable at that moment in time. But you can become the person now that would never allow those experiences. They wouldn't have to carry that. But you also have to drop that weight you're carrying. You know what I mean? And that's big. That's where therapy starts to work. Like there's a phenomenal motivational speaker called Simon Sinek that constantly talks about like there's layers, like the what, the how, and the why. Your first therapist was just trying to treat the what. I lash out. I do this. I do that. Oh, okay. Well, take a couple deep breaths and da 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 da. The second therapist said, why? Where is this stemming from? What is the origin of this anger? How do we treat? It's actually, unfortunately, like the medical industry in this country. We treat symptoms. Mm-hmm. We don't try to fix people. Right? Like you don't exercise ever. You eat a horrible diet. You're stressed to the max. You're doing all this, and you're wondering why your body aches. But instead, we're just going to give you something to take care of the pain. That is treating the what, okay? I have headaches every day, and I feel like shit. The doctor really probably should tell you, your lifestyle is garbage. You don't exercise. You're not taking care of yourself. When's the last time you've gone for a run or got on a treadmill? Do you eat healthy foods? Do you sleep well? Do you manage stress levels? Right? But that's a process. That takes getting to know a human being, genuinely caring for them, and then going through a healing process that they have to be fully supportive of and want to do. Versus it's so much easier when you have 60 patients a day to be like, oh, your head's hurting and this is hurting and your back's hurting. Here's this prescription. Even though that might lead to more problems, right? Your second therapist started to touch the why. And now when you start shedding light on those shut away doors of your mind, you start opening it because, our mind tries to protect us, right? We don't want to look in the door. You don't want to open that closet and remember the time that you felt so weak to this other man and like, why didn't I do? But when you look at it objectively with truth, it starts to dissolve all that things that might manifest into action nowadays. So this is huge. You start healing, you start doing better. And as a person that transforms yourself, all of a sudden you start being able to have more impact with the people around you. So let's start to talk about, as you're going through the healing process, when does it actually start hitting you like, I'm becoming different? Because that's a magic moment. A lot of people think they're helpless. You know what I mean? They don't go to therapy because this is just the way I am. I'm angry. But you start to see change. The other thing I want to ask you about, because I don't want to, let's answer that first. But I have a couple different things that I think our listeners would love to hear.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny you say that. I'm a kind of guy. You said it when we started. You said, James, when we sat down, you said I'm a driven person. I get up every morning. I meditate. I have a to-do list, and I crush my goals. I'm the kind of guy that does everything you just said, but at the end of the day, when I crush my goals, I always wonder what goals did I leave undone. You know what I'm saying? So when I was in therapy, or actually, I'm always in therapy. I go every month to a therapist, and as I was doing this, I was not aware of how I was changing until I slowed down. I was not aware, and really about 9 years ago is when I slowed down, what I tell people is I had several moments in life that major changes happened. About 9 years ago, my career changed and all of that. And there was a slowdown moment 9 years ago that was, we wanted to do it. We slowed down in a specific way. But honestly, what the component that was missing in anger was what you just said a minute ago about health. I didn't take my health seriously. At that time, I'm about like 250. I'm 5'9". What am I doing being 250? Like, I'm not like a, big weightlifter dude. That's a lot of weight to have on you. So I started taking my health a little bit more seriously, and I started to say, what I do at work isn't as important as the impact I leave at work. Those are two different things. I think sometimes we go to work and we feel like we need to do all these tasks, get all these tasks done. I'm a task guy. I love me some tasks. But the tasks don't matter. What matters is the impact that's left. Like how is someone different? So in my job today, one thing I ask myself is, how are people different after we have an interaction? When you and I have coffee and when you leave and I leave, how are you and I different? What changes in our process? So that kind of kept going me on that journey. So I would say about 9 years ago is when my wife finally looked at me and said, you are a different guy. You are a different guy than I thought you were, in a good way. And she stuck with me. She's a great gal. And as we go through this process, she says to me, hey, you're doing great. You're not who you are avoiding being, but you're even better than that. And I started to walk through that process. But I'll be honest with you, man, it's a daily battle for me because I grew up from a lady who honestly was just a fighter. And when you grow up from a lady that's that strong, you can never feel like you've gotten it done. And you said something earlier I wanted to also address. When you talk about why I never started beating up on myself, I had to raise a kid and all of that stuff at an early age, is partially because I never felt like Earth owed me anything. I think sometimes we walk through this earth, we believe it owes us something. Like, hey, I'm here, so I deserve this thing. And it's I don't even know where that comes from. It's no, you don't deserve anything. You're what you deserve is to walk this earth. You get to walk it for the time being God has you here, and then your job is to leave the impact. But the moment we start thinking that I earned something, it's bad. My mom didn't deserve to have cancer. My mom didn't deserve to have a man run out on her. That was never deserved, but it was the card she was dealt. And she never looked back. She said, I got to move forward. I got kids I got to raise now, and I got to walk through that. And I think if all of us started thinking about all right, this does suck. The current reality is awful, but I got to believe I can do better. And how do I do better in this situation?
I think you just hit on a massive point. Entitlement, although it might make you feel better, being oh, this should have happened, or I deserve this, or, this isn't fair. It's really disempowering. Mm-hmm. It rips your own power out from underneath you, because instead of being in the situation that you are clearly in and being it is time to change it, it is time to bring out the version of myself that's necessary to get through these problems, to get through the situation, to come out the other side successful, you disempower yourself by being why me? This should happen, that should. No. What happens, and then you have to respond to it accordingly.
Yeah, even bigger, James, I think it gives other people power, right? When I all of a sudden take the power away from myself by saying, oh, this crap's happening to me, what I'm doing is saying, but you have power to change my situation. And what I'm doing in that moment is taking what emotions are inside of me, my dad's emotions are inside of me. What I'm doing is taking all of that and putting it on you. And it's not yours to deal with. It's mine to deal with. It's mine to deal with my path and my journey through that process. And the power doesn't belong anywhere else. And I think sometimes we give other people way more power in our lives, and other times we give ourselves way less power than what we actually have.
No, you're 1,000% right. And that personal responsibility to make your own change is crucial. I don't care who you are. Nobody can change you if you don't want to change. I mean, we've all had friends that you want to see them do better. You love them very deeply. They're terrible alcoholics, or they have horrible anger issues. Until that person wants to take responsibility to change, you can't change them.
Right.
So now just look at the reverse of that theory. Nobody is going to change you unless you want to change you. Right. You know what I mean? And that has to come down to first admitting there's an issue.
Right.
You had to first say, man, I'm an angry person. I had these emotions that I haven't dealt with. I have some experiences from childhood that still hold weight on me to this day. And you had to go through the process of trying to heal that. And even if your wife wanted you to do it, your children wanted you to do it, you had to want to do it.
You just nailed something. So I, as a pastor, that's what I do today. We'll talk about that probably at the end here. But as a pastor today, one of the things I get to do, James, is sit across from a lot of people who tell me about their woes, how bad life's going. And it's one of the privileges I get. I get to sit by deathbeds. It's an honor. I get to be at weddings. It's exciting. I get to be at child dedications, powerful moments. And I get to be with people who are hurting. And I love what I get to do. Okay, it's a passion of mine. Absolutely love it. But when I sit there often, what I hear from especially a wife who wants better for her husband or boyfriend or whatever she wants is she's trying to change him with words, right? She's trying to change him by speaking. You know what my wife did for all those years that she saw an angry guy? She prayed. She prayed a lot. And you know what she did? She was the wife that a non-angry guy would want to marry one day. And when she did that, one day what happens is you're like, son of a gun, I better give her that guy or someone else will.
1000%. As I was sitting across the table, there's one of my favorite quotes of all time, which resonates with me so deeply. You just perfectly put into words. And what the quote says is, the greatest gift you have to give is that of your own personal transformation. Your wife wasn't telling you, you're angry, you need to do this, go get that, because then all that anger and frustration and because deep down it is true, but if you're not ready to grow and face it yet, is going to start turning back at her because she is giving you a reflection every day that you are inadequate, you're not good enough, you need to do this. And that is not the energy that is going to support the transformation that you needed to go through. What you just said, when my wife became the woman that a non-angry person deserves. Wow. Listen, if you only listen to that part of the podcast, that is worth its weight in gold. Because here's how this can be applied to our society or people you love. If you want the best for someone else, become the best version of yourself and allow that energy to influence them positively. There are unspoken things that we have through interaction with each other that are far more powerful than the words that we say. We know based on psychological principles that most human beings are driven by their limbic system, which is how they feel. It's not how they think. It's not the words that they're doing. It's not what they intake. It is how they feel. And if you had this rock solid woman that is giving you love and support that maybe you don't even fully deserve at your worst, but yet she's there for you because she loves you and believes in you, that energy right there helped bring out the Joe that was like, you know what? It's time to get this thing together.
Yeah, I think the one thing to for sure address, and I said this earlier on, but I'm not sure everyone caught it, James. When I was angry, my anger never turned to hurt her, right? It never got physical. So I want to say that is, although my wife became this woman that really I wanted to support and love and all these things, was she was never in a way where she felt dangerous, right?
You for sure. If you're getting beat up by someone, right, listen, get out of the situation. Right. We should be super clear about that. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you might think well, yeah, but I love this person. You know what? There's a certain point where if you don't love yourself enough, yep, and you have to love yourself first. You have to say, no, this is a healthy boundary that I will not cross. If someone is beating me, even if I believe deep down they're a good human being, self-love has to be first, right? We got to make sure we are taking care of who we are to then give our best to other people. So I know what point you're trying to make here. 100%. Right. You weren't endangering your wife and your children. Right. You were just struggling with some anger issues, and she had to see repercussions of that, right? But she was the woman that was by your side because she knew Joe can get past this.
Right. Well, and that's what we talked about, right? What she saw is that the current reality isn't what I want, but this guy can get to a future point where this is going to be better. And, I say these things, again, married 20 years, not saying we're at all perfect, by no means of the imagination, 3 teenagers at home, imagine that life. But what I am saying is we're committed to figuring it out and working through the conversation and committed through the process there, which honestly kept fueling me. It kept giving me how to move forward through the process of all of that. My wife always wanted a guy. This is funny, James. I hated reading. My wife always wanted a guy that would read more. You know what she never did? She never told me to read more. She just read more. And through the process, she would always say, hey, have you read this book? She knew I didn't read. She knew I didn't read, but she's like, have you read this book? And she kept doing this. And eventually I said, I should pick up a good book. So I started reading. And here's how I got there, James. This is funny. I picked up a book and it sucked, the first one. I picked up and it sucked, but I said, I'm committed to finish this book. And I finished it. And last year I read over 30 books last year, because I started saying to myself, I'm like, leaders need to learn, and I want to continuously learn what I don't know out there. So I kept working through that process, but it all started because some gal kept saying to me, who happens to be my wife, happened to say to me, have you read this book? And
I secretly think your wife is a mastermind over there. She's like figuring out, okay, I can't just tell him to do it. That's not going to work. But maybe if I can spark a little curiosity or just keep, hey, honey, have you read this book? And you're like, no. What about this book? No. Eventually you're like, you know what? I'm going to read a book. That's awesome. That's inspiring you through positive action just from her. without trying to put a pressure on you to do something you don't want to do. Because we don't like being told what to do, especially as men. Like, and I don't know if females feel the same, but as a man, I can tell you that if another person tells you you should do this, you just don't like the feel of it. You want to make the decisions that you want to make.
But that's why you're successful here, right? Like when you get the guys here together and you're all working out together, a group full of room, all of a sudden you're like inspired because you're inspiring each other. And that's what we can do in society. In society, what we're missing today, I honestly think what we're missing is that we miss saying the positive things about the people. We're quick at saying the bad things, right? Like we're like, what you said there's wrong. We said there. We're quick at that. And honestly, sometimes I'm even a culprit of that. But what we miss out on society is where we are able to like promote people up by what we believe they will be one day, right? You do it all the time. I know you do, right? What you guys do here is you believe in the future fighter. You don't believe in the current fighter. The current fighter, oftentimes you're like, oh boy, but the future fighter, you're like, oh yeah, you got this. And that's who you speak into in the ring. I watch Master Perez do it next door all the time with Andrew. Andrew might miss a kick or it might be too low, but he's like, you're almost there. Kick a little higher and you got that face kick, And I think when we continuously do that in society and people around us and we speak into what we want, right? You got bad customer service, say, hey, thank you for doing your best job today on customer service. Because what you're saying is, all of a sudden that person will say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't do a good job. But they all of a sudden said something that triggered me to think about better than that. One of my favorite books is called The Gold Standard, and it's a book about the Ritz-Carlton. And what Ritz-Carlton has done, James, is they've done this thing where they said, we are ladies and gentlemen that serve ladies and gentlemen. And when we think about society that way, that you and I are responsible for each other in the way of like how I help you be better. I think it's a great way. We've really gone sidetrack here.
No, it's all right. There's one more point I want to touch on this before we bounce back to your story. It's the same way as like, if you were a lesser version of yourself in the past and you have a group of people that hold that version of you in their mind and they constantly remind of your failures, of your mistakes, of the shit you've done, of the bad times, that is like a constant pull while you're trying to climb up or you're trying to better yourself. That is a constant pull back down. What you are speaking of is the exact reverse to that, where somebody is showing you a version of you that you have the potential of being. And if it is desirable and you're like, man, like you said with the fighters, man, I want to be that one day. I want to be that strong of a person. I want to have that type of willpower, that type of conviction, that type of resiliency within myself. And they see that version, it helps motivate them into the future because they're like, you know what? I'm going to become that. So you got to look at your environments and the people that you're around, because for as much as a positive environment can influence you the right way, Andrew, like believing, the belief has to come first. He has to believe I am capable of becoming this. And even if he doesn't believe it, maybe just Master Perez believing it and him admiring and respecting him and be like, you know what? He thinks I can be great. That can help pull him into the future versus if you're in situations or environments where people are constantly trying to make you feel lesser or remind you of when you were a failure and these things, that's a pull the other direction. So that is another huge thing for people that are trying to better their lives. You need to look at the people around you and make sure that these people want the best for you.
That's absolutely right. I think what happens sometimes in society today, and this will come back to my story here. I think when it happened 9 years ago for me, when I started going, I went from construction work. I worked in construction for 16 years. I owned my own business. I sold my business, a construction business, became a project manager. And then my wife said, hey, I think we should think about you doing full-time ministry. You always wanted to. That's your heart. That's your passion. So I took a job at a youth camp. And I worked at a Christian youth camp for a couple of years. And I think when we think about society and changes, I saw that the most in youth camp. We took inner city kids out of their environment that sometimes just is negative, right? Like they see sirens running all night long. They maybe are in a broken home. Maybe they're in a home that deals drugs or prostitution or any of that. We took these kids for 5 days out of that environment, and we put them in an environment that was supportive, was thankful for them. Taught them, like, we all sit down for meals together, right? Like we sit down and we have a meal together. We don't look at our phones. There's no phones allowed. Like, we're here together in this time. And I think when we do that, we start changing the environment. And everything else in nature is like that. When you think about like birds, they have an environment. When you think about worms, they have an environment. Plants, environment. We're the only people that think our environments don't affect us. Only humans think that our environments don't change us. That's why people don't get into the gym. That's why people don't change their work environments or don't do that, because they don't think that actually changes who they are inside. But absolutely they do. It changes who we are. And if 2 years of people staying at home didn't teach you that staying at home isn't healthy, then I don't know what would teach us that. So I think for us to think about what it looks like. So after 2 years in the camp world, I did that for a couple of years. I met some people at 242 Community Church and came over to 242 as one of the small group pastors, which is a really funny interview. I sat there across from other pastors, and they're interviewing. They're saying, Joe, are you a good pastor? Do you think so? And I'm like, no, I'm not a good pastor. I don't think I know how to be a pastor, because I didn't go to school for this or any of that stuff. And they said, all right, well, let's give you a try, which is really funny interview process. So it gives you a little insight into 242's interview process. So I started a journey with 242, and for a couple of years, my wife and I lived here in the Brighton area, working at the Brighton campus as one of the pastors on staff there. A couple of years into that, we felt called to help a movement of Christ followers do something similar in the Saginaw community. So we talked our kids into it, and we moved our kids into it, and people tell me I have really resilient kids, but when we moved up there, it's us five. So there's 5 of us and a couple other people that moved up there with us. And my kids, who are at the time, little 10-year-olds or 7-year-olds, they were actually leading teams of adults, because that's who I had. I had my kids. So I'm like, well, my kids know the 242 way. So kids, I need you to run tech. I need you to do this. And that's what they did. We did that for a couple of years, saw that church grow to about 250 people. And then through some other adoptions, they moved me back here to the Brighton community to originally was oversee the Brighton campus here, but actually my job today is I oversee Brighton, Livonia, Taylor, and Monroe, and I actually oversee their campus pastors. That's where my official title at the church is. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how can we as a church be known as a church that's for the community, partially because of my own story. My own story is I need to know who is for me. And I think we want to be a place where that's just healthy about us.
So growing up in a household that you had a Catholic influence and you had a Islamic influence, and now you are a Christian today, how did you navigate through the religions growing up? And what was it about Christianity that spoke to you individually? And did you do a deep dive into religions before you did this? Did you study deeply into Hinduism or Buddhism or many of the religions around the world? And what was it about Christianity that you said, man, this clicks with me? And I also want to talk about, in a modern world, because society has changed so much, what do you think the role is of religion and why it is so vital for communities and societies and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first question about my deep dive, I did not do a deep dive. I think how I came to know Jesus is I had basically a fist fight with Jesus, is what I'll say. I came to a point where I couldn't do anything except accept him. And what I mean by that is life didn't seem worth it without Jesus anymore. So then that caused me to go on a journey with Jesus and make it where it was real for me. For the first was, I think, was more of an emotional thing where I understood who God was, but I need to understand why does this make sense? And then through this, through studies, I've recognized how old the Bible is. I've recognized how old the documents are and the importance, and how history has just walked through the Bible in different ways. So I've come to believe it, but mostly because of its intersection with my story. And honestly, a lot of my healing also with my own father, what I realized was that my Heavenly Father was always for me. He always desired good things for me. He desired this whole relationship. And how Josh walked with me through life. Josh didn't do that because Josh wanted to be a good guy. Josh did that because Jesus had such an impact on Josh's life that Josh knew he had to leave an impact. So the intersect was a lot to do with how the influence of God over someone's life makes them have to leave influence over other people's lives. I think the next question about, I think specifically to churches, Christianity and churches are two different things if you ask me. Christianity is how someone follows Jesus, is a Christ follower, a disciple of Jesus. Churches are communities of people that are Christ followers. I think churches today need to do a way better job of being influencers in the community. And I mean in a way where if the church is gone, the community would say, I want it back. I want that church back. And I think there's too many churches that honestly, if they were gone today, we wouldn't even know they were existing. Too many churches have started worrying more about people inside their doors than the people outside of their doors. And that's the opposite of the teachings of Jesus. The teaching of Jesus are that we care about all people in our communities, and how do we impact them? How is the churches the local hub of things happening? How are we the people that say we care about everyone? Matter of fact, that's kind of why I love 242. That's one of the reasons why I love what I get to do. And one of the reasons I love it is because we have those conversations all the time. I remember Christmas Eve this past year. We started going to Christmas Eve this past year, and James, as you know, everywhere else, money is just tight. Money's hard in places, and we looked at our budget. We're in a budget meeting where things just didn't look promising for 2022, and we're having this conversation, and our senior pastor stops and he says, "Cool, we'll figure this out later. In the meantime, Christmas Eve, we're going to give away all of the offering to a local community somehow." And we did that here in Brighton. We gave it to Community Catalyst down the street. And met up with the organization there. We've done that all throughout other times in our history. Is how do we give back to the community that has us? Because a church should just not be a place that you go to on Sunday morning. That actually isn't a church. That's a building. People go to a YMCA on a certain day of the week, right? So church should be a people that leave and go do something with what they've gotten. And I think that's how I think churches need to change into the future here.
So looking at society now and kind of what we were talking about before the podcast without going into any exact examples, you have a super polarized society. You have a lot of very angry people. You have emotional outbursts everywhere. We have a detachment from like critical conversations or like constructive criticism of ideas that should be challenged, where we should have open debate and dialogue for the future of our children and societies, et cetera. How do you take a community because like even in Livingston County, people are incredibly divided on every issue that we can name. Any issue we named on the podcast, there would be something where someone's on this side and they think that this person is their enemy, and someone's on this side and they think this person's their enemy, whether it's politics or anything. How does the church bring people together and get back to that connected of like, because beyond all that, the teaching of Jesus is like loving your neighbor, being a good human being, staples of morality in life. These are very simple principles that we should all be able to agree upon, whether or not you carry this label or that label in an external factor. How do you get people to get back into that type of thinking when a Republican believes that a liberal is out of their mind in this, and a liberal thinks that a Republican is Satan, and how do we start bringing our communities back together as people to share in the love and experience the same way that you and your friend did when you went to Wendy's and you went to haircuts? Because I like that you told that story early on, because there's beauty in that. Human connection of that level can drastically alter the course of someone's life. Having someone that gives a shit about you, that cares about you, that is there for you, that sees you for who you are fully and accepts you as that and wants better for you and you want better for them, is a life-altering experience. How do we start to create that in such a divided society?
I think step one is, you said it, right? The ways of Jesus are love. And the way of love is that I don't love you, James, because you're ever going to do something for me. I love you because you're you. God made you. You're created. You're here. I'm thankful for you. We met today for the very first time. We've talked on social media a few times, but this is the first time we've met, and I have love for you. And I think the way of Jesus is just that. No matter what you say in this conversation today, my love for you won't change because I don't feel like you owe me anything. I don't owe you anything. It's just that we're here together in this earth. And I think step one, I think the church needs to go back to just teaching the way of Jesus. I think church has gotten away from just teaching the ways of Jesus. So how churches can help in the future conversation is we need to not only teach the way of Jesus, we need to show the way of Jesus by example. There's too many pulpits that are filled with people that will share a message on Sunday and there's no action behind what they share. You can't look at them and say, how has this person lived this out? And, I've mentioned this already, but I'm not a fighter, but I've watched some of your matches and stuff. Here's how I actually saw this happen in a ring with one of you guys. I don't know who was fighting, but you guys were in a fight in a ring, and the ring was over. Your guy won, and they go across the mat after they won. The ref calls the winner. You know what they do to the other guy across the mat? They hugged him. Because you know what was true about the moment? We were both fighting. but I respect you. And I think what we've gone away from this society is that, hey, man, you can think what you want to think. You can like Trump. You can like Biden. I don't really care. I love you. And that's more important than what you think or not think. I think where it's becoming different than that is when we're trying to force people to believe what I believe just because maybe my way is better. I think that's when it gets a little bit out there and crazy. But the teaching of Jesus is just about love, man. Matter of fact, that's what he says. He says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the second greatest commandment. Like, how do we do that? And think about how much you love yourself. I love myself a whole heck of a lot. How do I love my neighbor to that level? Where if my neighbor who doesn't have a fence and his dog poops on my lawn, how do I love him just like I love me? How do I do that well in this society? So we don't have a basis of that. It's impossible for us to have a basis of like deeper, harder conversations. Like we've been forced in some deep, hard conversations this year. But if I was asked today, what would I change? I would change that all churches would start just teaching the way of Jesus, teach that as their model. All churches did that. And then literally on Monday morning, don't philosophize about it. Don't look at stats about it. Don't do anything. Go and do.
Simply be it. The way your wife wasn't telling you all the things she had to do, she was being the woman that she should be. You're saying, don't just preach the things that you think people want to hear. Be the change in the community, right? Be the actual people that when others look at you, they say, that's a better model for society. It's painted on our wall out there. It says, we are all one. And I have all the nation's flags like hanging. I have everything from China to Korea to everything, because it is the idea that we are just people. And if you can get people to realize that and stop disconnecting so much, we can come together more. And then we're going to have our differences. And, not to be blunt, but like we need to call out right from wrong. Mm-hmm. As a society, we've also gotten to the point where we're afraid to even speak up and question things for fear of other people coming down on us. No, we should stand on what's right. And the more, if you become a person that does lead with love and acceptance and kindness for other people, well, then you know what? You're not afraid to every once in a while go, but that's bullshit. And we can't allow that. You know what I mean? Because you know that you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to give your best energy. You're trying to live as the best version of yourself. But then you can stand in the light, right? Most people, if that spotlight's going to come down on them, they'll cower to that. Well, if you're not living a standard you're proud of, how in the world can you stand in resistance to anything? You know what I mean? So I think if we could get back to that, we would build stronger people. We would build, then by having stronger people, stronger communities, stronger family units, stronger values, and we would impact others on a much larger scale. Because you're not talking about it, you're being about it.
Well, that's right. You nailed it too. Like the Roman Empire, right? The Roman Empire crumbled not because of an outside Babylonian attack or anything like that. It was because the family fabric torn apart, right? The idea that we no longer have a family unit that is the most important thing in our family, right? So like my kids, they show up for one another. Like my one boy is like, Dad, I don't want to sit for an 8-hour Taekwondo tournament, but he comes. You know why he comes? Because he shows up for his brother, who will have one fight in that 8-hour tournament, but we show up for one another. And I think when we go back to the family fabric and we start saying to ourselves, how do we be for each other? Then we'll care more about being for people outside our walls, and how do we do that in a good and positive way? I think that's the important conversation we got to have.
And I think we're seeing that across society. We are seeing the breakdown of families and real structure and living by the examples or teachings, as you would call them, and really being profound versions of ourselves that influence our direct area, our family, etc. So we're seeing the ramifications of that. We're seeing the consequences of that. We're seeing what it looks like when kids grow up in a home with no discipline, no leadership, no accountability, no personal responsibility, and now all of a sudden they're adults and leaders and people that are going to influence change. And that's a dangerous dynamic because all of those things are crucial. Like personal responsibility, learning to have discipline, knowing right from wrong, and actually acting out the side that matters. You know what I mean? Like we're kind of witnessing this across society. So you think the real profound change from a church's perspective is getting back to that core essence of bringing human beings together through the teachings of Jesus and through love. And if you can affect the direct surrounding areas by strengthening family bonds, strengthening ties between friends, strengthening human connection, and realizing that like that person that you're going to write off as a horrible this, that, and the other thing is just an extension of you. That's your neighbor. Even if it's not literally your neighbor, it's your neighbor.
Well, yeah, not only do I think society has proven it. England did this. In England, John Wesley, he launched a Methodist movement. And the Methodist movement had some core principles. Check this out. The core principles are so innate in that community that you as an employer, if I as an employee wrote on my resume, I go to a Methodist church, you would hire me only based on that because of what the Methodist people stood for. So if the teaching of Jesus left the auditoriums of our churches and literally hit the streets at the same volume that they're taught and hit those streets, we would have a different society. We'd have a different world.
I believe it 100%. I mean, I know even just from in here, when people are looking for workers, if they find out someone is a member of my team, the CEO of local companies have called out to me, hey, man, this trains at your academy. They know me. Brian trains at your academy. Can you tell me about him? And then just on my word, that person gets hired the next day because they say, we believe in the type of people you're trying to create in your environments. And we know that if they're associated with you and you speak highly of them, that we can trust that. It's the same ideology there. Now, my question would be is, let's say for people that are very non-religious or people that are Islamic in belief or people that are Catholic or people that are any other religion, to have a community together, especially in a nation like America, we're a melting pot. We have to be able to have love and acceptance for everyone.
Absolutely.
How do we make people, like, how do you make the atheist feel as welcome in the community as the Islamic believer, as the Catholic believer, when we're preaching from a state of like, hey, our mutual connection here is ideology? Because we all come into this building under the principles of Christianity. But really, you and I know it's much bigger than that. It's about uniting human beings in the proper pursuit of living the right way, right? How do we do that? Because I'll tell you the truth, I've never been to church ever in my whole life. I think when I was a super little baby, I was, I don't remember the name of it, but I was baptized Lutheran or something like that. Lutheran.
Yeah.
So I was baptized, but then from maybe 1 year old, I've never been to a church ever, except maybe in weddings or things like this. But I have so much love for tons of my friends that are really religious. I have, and I love their belief in their faith and things like that. But how would you make people outside of the ideology feel like, man, you know what? I should be a part of that community too, when the overall top of the pyramid is Christianity or it's the teachings of Jesus. How do you fill in the rest of that pyramid to really unite society?
Yeah, I'll share a story with you. There's a church in Brooklyn. One of the things that I do for our church also is I meet with other churches across the country. There's a church in Brooklyn that had a building that was being condemned. And they went to the building department to find out, like, why is it being condemned and all this stuff. And the list was larger than they had money in the bank to pay for it. So they didn't know what to do. You know who actually paid to fix their building? The Islamic mosque down the street came to them and said, we have to have you in this community, so we're going to pay to fix your building. So what happens when real love is shown is everyone is brought in. It doesn't matter where you're at today. What we're more concerned about is our eternity. Let's have a conversation about that whenever you want to have it, but we're all in this together. Let's have a conversation. That's what I'm saying. When we operate in real love, you don't owe me anything. I don't owe you anything. We owe each other a conversation and walking through this together in this life. So I think how people are brought into that is on Sunday mornings at 2:42. If you show up there, we're going to teach the ways of Jesus. We're going to share the message of that. But if you come in as an atheist, we're going to journey with you however long that journey is. We would love to have a coffee with you and have a conversation about that and walk away from a conversation understanding each other better. And I think that's a way that we take a step forward to that. We hold the belief that Jesus is the way to eternity. That's our belief as Christ followers, and I've sold out my life for that belief. So I have a lot of faith in that particular belief, but that does not mean that my Islamic brother sits across from me or my Mormon friend. Matter of fact, my wife is, again, a gatherer of people, and we go camping. This is our 11th year. At Memorial Day, we go camping, and on that camping trip, there's Catholics, there's Mormons, there's Lutherans, there's atheists, there's people who don't even know who Jesus is. And you know what we do? We usually have one or two big bonfires, and we all sit around. And if someone wants to play a worship song, they play it. If someone wants to read a poem, they read it. And all these people sit around this campfire, and they have love for one another.
Regardless of their belief systems, do you believe that they all can achieve the same salvation or the same? That's like, okay, you have all the different ideologies out there. Do all of those people get to experience what you classify as heaven?
That's a great question. So in my belief system, no. So and Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Without accepting of Jesus, I would say no to that. But I think that, to me, again, I think that is a conversation I would have with someone. And actually, I've had it. I had a couple that, when I was in Saginaw campus area, had a very different belief than me. And James, we talked for about 2.5 hours over coffee, and our conversation was going to mean that they felt like they couldn't be a part of what we were doing. Is how they decided to deselect themselves from what we were doing in our community. It was their decision. They were invited in. They chose not to be invited in. But in this 2.5 hour coffee, we're all crying. We're all sharing love, and we all hugged each other and walked out of the conversation. And what I believe in that moment is that's what my Lord, my Jesus, taught me to do in that moment. I believe 100% what I understand from the Bible is there's only one way to Jesus and one way to heaven. 100% believe that. But it does not exclude me from showing the love and caring for each person as they are uniquely made.
I love how honest your response was there. I love that you didn't give me like a little bit, a sugar-coated bullshit. You flat out just said, no, I don't believe that. Because as someone that has always like questioned kind of everything in life, I look at, if I live my life as a good human being and I do the right thing and I love people and I level up and I inspire and I change and I motivate, and I am denied access by a higher power to this eternal paradise that you believe in, while living as a good human being, but a murderer, rapist, all of these things that confesses his love for Jesus and follows the path at the end of his life, he is allowed in. That's not something that I fully support, because if God is all powerful and all knowing and all omnipresent, and he's willing to cut down a good human being simply because who lived his life with grace, who loved the neighbor as if it was themselves, who admitted where they were wrong, who leveled up, went through this experience, or let's just talk about it hypothetically, the polar opposite, but at the very end, they follow the teaching of Jesus, they repent, they do these things, they're allowed. That is a wild belief system to me, because you're basically saying, if you don't come to my ideological conclusions, you are not allowed to experience the bliss that I will experience in the afterlife. And that is a huge jump. That's like the one jump that, and I'm honored to be having this conversation with you today. That's like the one jump I've always struggled with is, you're telling me the best human being that ever lived, Gandhi, cannot experience heaven, but Jeffrey Dahmer could have.
Well, that's under the thought process that Jeffrey Dahmer.
No, yeah, we're saying hypothetical.
But same thing.
He accepts Jesus. He does all these things at the end of his life. He learns his lessons. Jeffrey Dahmer will be in heaven, but Gandhi won't.
What if Gandhi accepts Jesus at the end of his life also?
Yeah, but not in that hypothetical. You know what I'm saying? That's like that. Honest to God, that is the biggest separation between where I am now and like I feel like being more supportive of it. And I don't mean this in any negative way, because like I said, I have so many friends that are multiple pastor friends. Natalie Furlong runs one of the local churches, like, and I love these people. They're phenomenal human beings. But I just always remember that jump being like a huge thing. So like, it's not about being a good person. It's not about this. It's not about the right or wrong you do. It's not about being a leader to your children and your communities and inspiring. It's not about any of those things. It is just about my servitude to something.
Well, I want to say this before I say what I say next. James, what I love about this conversation is kind of how we even started this before these mics turned on. Is this a respect conversation, right? I respect you, man, 100%. And what I love about this conversation is that we'll end this conversation and there's respect still here. And I love that part of the conversation. And honestly, people like you are probably what these conversations take the longest. Here's why. You have a good moral compass. Like right now, I bet if I asked you good and wrong, you would answer everything I would answer, 100%. You'd be like, this is good, this is bad. you have a solid moral compass. You are a great human. Like, honestly, you are. Like, I pay attention to what you do. I pay attention to what's happening here in Brighton community. You are a leader and a pioneer in our community, and you're doing a mighty big work. So what's hard about your journey is you're like, that's really good. Doesn't that go into like my eternal savings account? Like, how do I put money into that account? I feel like I'm putting money in that account. How am I not doing that? And I think what's really hard for our journey when we're like that is to understand that my really good, no matter how good I am, isn't good enough. That's what's really hard about that journey. And when we understand that aspect, that no matter how good I am, how perfect I am, how I never do anything wrong.
No, there's nobody that never does anything wrong. That's not true. That's like, there's no human being that's ever walked this earth. But the big discussion that I was having there was being a good person doesn't matter.
Nope.
Not at all. That is, and like, I love how straightforward you just responded to that. It's not about being a good person. It's not about doing the right thing. It's not about, really having a positive effect on the world. It's just about your servitude to something else.
It's bigger than that. It's not even your servitude.
Well, I might be using the wrong word.
No, you're fine. You're fine. But for our podcast listeners, I think it's not even servitude. It's accepting of something that's a free gift. And that's what makes salvation so beautiful. What makes salvation beautiful, James, it's
just there.
It's it.
It's there for the taking. But now, isn't someone that believes in Islam believing they are receiving the gift from their Lord and Creator the same way that you do from Jesus? Or someone that follows the Catholic religion or this religion or Buddhism, they believe that human beings can reach enlightenment. Like, I believe that somewhere in Christianity, it was decided whether Jesus, the Nicene Council, is that where it was? Where it was decided whether Jesus was a man that achieved enlightenment or a man that was a direct descendant of a deity. And by one vote, he became a direct descendant of a deity. Because otherwise, you and I sitting here might be like, we as men, as consciousness experiencing itself subjectively through our experiences and everything in life, can achieve the level of enlightenment or the process by being a good human, by having your moral code, by doing all these things, to then have our enlightenment, our savior, our grace. But we're in a conversation where even if you and I are great human beings and there's two horrific human beings, the two people that accept this one gift from one religion, not the others, get to the next step and the others will not. If that is like the fundamental question where, like, the man that's born and raised in Iran that believes in his religion, that is Islamic, that is told that this is how you achieve. How do you know that Joe, born here following Christianity, is not the one on the wrong side when the person on the Islamic side could be, hey, if they didn't believe in Islam, Joe was on the wrong fence here, he doesn't get into heaven. What gives you that peace of mind to be like, I know that I'm right?
Yeah, I think it's probably the same peace of mind that takes you to know that you were created to do what you're doing here in Brighton, right? Like, you have a certain determination that you believe what you're currently doing is the exact thing that you need to be doing. So I think when I met Jesus, it was so clear.
Tell me about that moment.
Yeah. So when I met Jesus, it came with a lot of anger. And honestly, my path to getting out of the anger, what I thought is going to be that I was going to be a good guy. I was going to figure out how to be a good guy, get a good gal eventually, be a broker somewhere. I wanted to be a stockbroker. And in the process of doing that, what I met was a Jesus that met me, and a peace came over me that I can't even explain. But what I can tell you is the rage inside me was more than control. Like you said, why didn't you turn to alcohol or something like that? Was more than I could particularly control. But all of a sudden, I was finding a peace and a calm when he spoke to me. In the Bible, there's a scene where Jesus is baptized, and when he's baptized, comes out of the water, the heavens open up, and there's a dove. You got to believe all this stuff if you're going to read it. There's a dove that says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." In this moment, for my own journey, what I felt like is my father looked down on me once and said, "I'm pleased with you, Joe, just the way you are." And that gave me a peace and an understanding that I was able to walk through my life with. And like I said, I mean, I left a construction career while I was making well over 6 figures into a church ministry career, making nowhere near that, because what I believe is that the greatest thing I'll do on this earth is help people find Jesus. Now, that's a great question, what you said, right? Like, how does a person, there's people that are Islamic who have as much determination as I do. I promise you they are.
There's Joes all over the world of every different religion that are fully convicted and fully believe in what they're doing under a different thing, each one thinking the other is not correct.
Yeah. So one thing that's probably make me major different is I probably will never tell them they're not correct. What I'll probably always tell them is that I love them and I have a high regards for them. And then what I will learn everything I can from them. So I will sit and learn and process and all of that from as many people as possible. If they ask me a question like you asked me, I would answer the same way I'd answered you. And just like I asked them the question, they would answer the same way is what I would hope. And I think for me is I don't have all the answers. The answers I have led me to a conclusion that's worth me selling my life out for. And if I get to that final destination and realize, oh, dang it, screwed that one up, then I think I'll be okay with that. And that's how I'm processing my life is if I am wrong, I like being this side of wrong because I'll live a life of love and care and where I've been kind to people, where I've tried to tell the truth, and I've tried to encourage people to ask themselves good questions.
What you just said brings us together as brothers, and I'm going to explain why. Take the exact words, listen to this podcast, and replay his exact words, pretending like I'm saying them, and it's exactly what I would say. If I've lived this life from start to finish, trying to be a good man, giving the best I can, trying to be a good father, a good leader, a good friend, inspire others, have love in my heart, take a step back when I'm hurt by others and try to understand with some grace why they did that. And I live my life benevolently as much as possible, learning from my mistakes and getting better. And if at the end of my rope, I found out that, I was supposed to be on this side of that, I would feel perfectly at peace with that. You know what? It's like because we live with conviction. We both believe in being a good human being and trying to do the right things for others. We just have a different ideological stance on what that means in the end.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
right.
then and that's where I have so much respect for people with conviction and with passion, because you are doing God's work and I am doing the work that I just believe the world needs, but we are doing the same thing. So that's where I really believe I think it's easy to accept everybody, and I can tell you accept everyone. I've met a lot of religious people that are very judgmental, that when they find out I'm not religious, they're very wait, you don't believe in God? And I get treated a different way by them. But I don't feel that energy from you at all. And it's I'm not sitting here saying I don't believe in God. What it is I don't know. There's a lot out there that I don't understand that is much bigger than me. I don't know if Buddhism's got it right, Christianity's got it right, this has got it right. And I've studied a lot of them in depth. Otherwise, why would I know about the Nicene Council? And I've read them. I read deeply in each to try to figure out which resonate with me. And I just got back to this, there's parts of the universe that I'll never understand, that are much bigger than I am. But I do know, to my soul, spirit, whatever you want to classify it as, the core of my existence, I know the difference between doing the right thing and loving people and giving positive energy and trying to inspire people. And I know the difference from the wrong thing.
If people fast forward all the way to the end, I think these last couple of paragraphs are probably the most important part, what you just said. And I think the other one is we need to live our life on purpose, right? You find that purpose. Find that purpose. For me, it's been through the Word of God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit. It's changed my life. It's changed who I am. My kids have changed because of it, and I believe 100%. I mean, I went from a guy, we met when my wife and I got married, the pre-marriage counselor said, you guys will be divorced within a year. He said, I'll be shocked if you're not. He says, my wife's dad committed suicide, was a drug addict, heroin addict, broken home there. And then we got my broken home. I'm beat, all this stuff. We got these two broken homes coming together. And the guy said, you're going to have to fight every day for your marriage. You're going to have to fight for this thing. And I believe we were able to do it because of the power of Jesus that he gave us to do that very thing. So I think if anyone caught anything in this podcast, I think the major thing for me is to walk away with understanding why you do what you do. Don't just go work for the man every day and not know why you do that. Don't just, try to raise kids and don't understand that, man, your kids are your legacy. How you leave them will change the world. I know from watching you guys, like, you guys don't go into a fight just thinking you're in that fight just for that temporary moment. That fight lasts, 15, 20 minutes and you're done? No, that's bigger. That's something bigger. It's going to propel something in the future that leaves a legacy that's enormous, that's huge. And I think if people can walk away with the mindset of, like, we are meant to be on this earth to leave something on this earth. What does that look like? And how do we do that to the best of our abilities is what we're tasked with.
100%. And now I got a couple questions that I think would be good for the listeners too. How do you get people, because you've gone through the journey to find purpose, you've had a moment speak to you, and you've been on the mission ever since. How do you try to get to people, because I'm sure you have plenty of people coming your door that don't really have the purpose. They don't have the spark yet. They haven't found that calling or that spirit that they're meant to chase. How do you try to get people to find passion? How do you try to find people in the community, to bring out their best? What do you think the processes are that we can do as leaders to inspire the people that need us the most to find purpose?
Man, I'm going to reflect that back, because what you said at the beginning of our podcast is what you need to say. James, why don't you tell us why you started this podcast a couple of years ago? Tell us.
Yeah, 100%. I saw that people were divided, and I saw that there was a lot of hate flying around. And I saw that the disconnect between different tribes is so far. Like, it's one group of people label themselves, let's just say, religious and non-religious. And then the separation has gotten so extreme that you're not even willing to sit down across from another human being and exchange information and ideas and positive emotions. Like, a lot of times people on a basic psychological principle will identify with a thought or certain, thought process. And then if that is challenged, they directly feel challenged. And instead of just saying, hey, I'm a human being with this opinion, and you're a human being with this opinion. And if we get down and we talk about those things together, we can make progress, or at least we can have mutual respect. We can shake each other's hand and say, hey, we're different, but we accept those differences and we appreciate those differences. And we value the fact that we were able to come together more than hate the fact that we're different. So when I was thinking about this podcast, I said, how do I, as a leader, because I can affect all the people that walk in this building and the people that follow me. There's a lot of people online that know who I am, that listen to me, that reach out to me. How can I affect these people positively? Not for me. I am successful. I do well. I have a beautiful home. I have a beautiful family. I don't need more. I'm good. And like, I have a lot of goals and I want to achieve more things, but I am like killing it in every way that the young, depressed version of myself would hope that I would get to. But how do I actually inspire positive change? And when I said, you know what I need to do? I need to bring people from every walk of life together, and I need to have conversations with these people, and I need to let their power, their passion convey itself through the microphone, through the message to people, because your words will resonate with some people. My words will resonate with some people. Other guests that sit in here will resonate with people. But if we are just trying at the essence to empower people to go get what you need in this life, find your best, seek the therapy, find the why, all of the things that we've discussed today, that's the power. That's the impact.
So to answer your question, I would say at a minimum, 5 out of 10 people in the last 2 years said, I wish people started being kind to one another. You did something about that. You said, I'm going to create a platform for this conversation. And I think how we help people find purpose is, again, I help people find purpose through the way of Jesus. But how I do that oftentimes is fueling their own personal mission. Right? Someone might come to me and say, Eileen Zilch here in our county, Eileen may come to us and say, hey, I feel passion for homeless community and affordable housing here in our county, which is one of the hardest counties to find affordable housing. You have a house, you know how hard it is to find a house here. And she has a passion about that. So how can we fuel that and help Eileen do her good work there? Or how can we help someone else who wants to do a soup kitchen, or how we do that? When people usually feel these desires in them, what they usually do is complain about them. They usually say it's someone else's problem. I wish that our government was better, and if our government was better, we wouldn't have homelessness. If our government was better, we wouldn't have rape going on. If our government was better, everything's someone else's problem. What you did a couple years ago is you said, I can change that. I'm going to change the narrative. And you leaned into that. So when people like you would ask me, how do you change and how do you find purpose? I would say, I believe it's inside you already. It's inside speaking to you. You have to give it the voice that it needs. You have to say, oh, that's mine. That's mine to do. It's no one else's to do. When people call the church and say, hey, the church should do this clothes drive, you know what I always tell them? Like, yep, when are you going to do it for me? I always tell people that. And the most common one I get, because I'm a pastor, the most common one I get is people call and say, hey, I have a best friend who's about to go through a divorce. Will you meet with them? And I say, nope, I'll meet with you to equip your best friend to have a conversation with your best friend. Because the best thing I can do for you who's already in that community is for you to be the voice of reason, for you to have the conversation.
You already have the connection. You're the magic piece. Don't disempower yourself. You don't need me. You're the one that can literally make the change. You're empowering people. But now there has to be a certain dynamic to the fact that I love that you just said we have to empower people, because I agree. Me, you, every other person should be trying to empower others, not really push others to, hey, if let's say I'm not religious. I don't ever want to push to anyone, though, like, you should doubt religion and you should this. I'm not saying that by any means. You should find your purpose. You should find your passion. I should try to empower you to do that. But you also have to have some type of, and maybe I'm wrong, some type of calling or conviction to the idea that I'm not just trying to help people find purpose and passion. I have to get them to accept the love and followings and teachings of Jesus, because if you believe that the end result is if they're not on this side of the fence, they're not going to experience this thing, that puts a certain obligation on you that I don't have. Like, I just want, if I just met you today and I knew nothing about your ideological stances or anything like that, I would just be like, hey, how can I help Joe be the best Joe he can be, whether it's the best construction worker, best friend, whatever it is. But there's nothing attached to that. It's just like, hey, if you're better, we all get better, man. The community's better. Our kids are going to have a better area to grow up. You know what I mean? But you have a certain thing. So how does that dynamic work? And do you even lay that out? Or is it like when people come to you for that stage, that's when you bring that to the table?
Oh, absolutely. I never lay it out. Never. When Josh told me about Jesus after hanging out with me for 3 years? Like, Josh never. Like, honestly, it was haircuts, Wendy's, arcade. That's what we did.
I didn't even know. I didn't even know that part of your story. Josh actually was the one that started to introduce the teachings of Jesus to you years after you two had developed a close bond. Because I was trying to figure out where exactly in the story Christianity comes from. Because I'm like, I'm Catholicism, I got Islam. Yeah. Like, where does Christianity? So then he came about like, hey, this is what I believe in, and this is got it. So now it's all starting to link up.
Yeah. So what Jesus teaches in the Bible, it's what he did throughout his life here on earth. What he teaches us is that you and I are first meant for relationship. And through relationship, what we call it in the Bible is people of peace. You and I are people of peace already. We get along. We're fine, right? But as these doors open up, eventually you will ask a question. Eventually my neighbor's going to walk across the yard and say, hey, want to have a beer? I want to talk to you about something. Because if I live my life according to my calling, eventually my neighbor will ask me about what's going on. I imagine the same thing in your world, right? Imagine in your world, not many people don't know you're not a fighter, right? Many people probably know you're a fighter. They know you run a gym, right? So if I want to get healthy, my doctor just told me some really, really bad news, I'm pretty sure I'm going to call you and say, hey, bro, can we have a conversation? Tell me, like, I don't want to get on these pills, but my doctor tells me if I don't get my blood pressure under control, it's a real problem. And then you're going to be able to walk them through a process on how can they get healthy, what does that look like for them? Life? And honestly, like what you do here changes their whole lives. It doesn't just change what they do in the mat here, changes everything they do and how they process and think about life.
I think we're very similar in that way that, like, what happens inside of the church community should affect people in every aspect of their lives, because they should be fundamentally changing as people to try to be better members of a community, better followers of Christ, better, citizens of the world. And that's what I expect out of my people here. Like, we've kicked people out of this program where I don't need to teach an asshole how to hurt people. And if you walk in this door as an asshole, I'll actually give you the time of day, and I'm going to treat you with the utmost respect and kindness. And And I always tell my fighters, because a lot of these fighters have a lot of fire in their gut. You know what I mean? You can imagine these dudes that want to go out and get in a cage and throw down. They have a lot of fire. And that can either burn them to the ground, or it can create these incredibly battle-forged, like, warriors that can go out into life. But I tell people, like, when you encounter an asshole, don't treat them as they are. Treat them as a reflection of who you are. Them being an asshole is completely external to you. You need to stand with respect, with honor, with integrity, treat them with kindness. And then you know what you're helping to do? You're helping to show that person that maybe not all the world is as hostile as they think. Because if I treat you exactly based on who you are when you walk in the door, and you're brash and you're this, that, and then I return that energy to you, I am only reinforcing to you that the world is hostile, that there's problems, that there's this. And you see, this is why you should be like that. You know, and by doing that work with people, we can fundamentally change people, which then can change the community. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but bullying in schools has always been an issue. And recently, I've had multiple schools constantly contact me. You know, I've actually spoken at a graduation at 242. I don't know if you know that. Yeah. I think it was before you were the head guy there. Kelly was still there at the time. But anyway, the schools had reached out to me and said, you know, we'd like to do something about bullying. And I said, the best thing you could do is send me all your bullies. And they're like, what? Like, I'm like, yeah, send the bullies that you have, the worst kids, the kids that are making life hell for the other students, send me those kids. And in their mind, they're like, why would we teach the bullies how to hurt people? But what they don't realize is those people aren't bullies when they come in this gym. The kid that's bullying other people, man, his home life probably sucks. He had a terrible father. He had drugs in his family. He has major insecurities. He has a huge self-doubt within himself, so he creates this ultra-hard shell so that nobody challenges him. When they walk in this building and they see professional heavyweight UFC fighter Josh Parisian, these other pro fighters smashing bags and hitting things, you don't see the tiniest reflection of a bully ever. You actually see the mask pulled off, and you see the vulnerable person that is like, oh, I hope I don't get bullied here. Like, they're ultra uncomfortable. They know they can't take that like macho stance. And then you know what happens? That powerful person walks up to them and goes, hey, my name's Josh. Nice to meet you. What's your name? And that person goes like, oh my God, it is better to be treated this way and to be treated with kindness and respect. This guy could bully me. He could make me feel bad. He could physically harm me, mentally abuse me, but he's treating me with respect. And if we can teach people through who we are better ways to be, we can change the world.
Well, that's, you know, again, just different ways we're teaching it, right? So in 242, or how I would teach it is I would say we're all made in God's image. That's what the Bible teaches us. Genesis 1:27, we're all made in God's image, the imago Dei. So when I look at that bully, I don't see a kid that's angry. I see a kid that's hurt. I see a kid that's broken. I see a kid that needs to know love and care. It doesn't mean the kid doesn't need some tough love. He needs some tough love. He needs some someone,
some discipline, some structure.
Yeah, someone to hold him accountable and have a conversation. But honestly, half of our world needs accountable, if not more, right? Half our world needs structure when you look out there and what's going on.
So do you believe the religion lays the foundations for these healthier lifestyles? Like, that's one of the jobs of religion, is it basically teaches you accountability within yourself. It teaches you conviction to a higher cause, or like connection to people. Do you think, because you said earlier you think the fabric of our families and societies is breaking down, do you think that religion could be the filler in that, to recreate healthy structure and stuff, to then yield a better environment for the children, for the next generations, etc.?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if we were just having a conversation today about that, I would say that the reason the family structure is torn down is because we remove religion out of it. The reason the family structure in the United States specifically is torn down is because religion has been removed out of schools. So if you were to ask me, why do I think we're currently struggling, I would tell you that's why. Because here's why. If I'm in a broken society, like in Detroit, where there's a lot of broken homes, not everywhere, there's a lot of great homes, but Detroit has a higher count of that, and we know that from stats and all that. I grew up in Detroit, so anyone on podcast that's mad about that, I'm a Detroit guy. So when we look at that, and we now taken Jesus out of schools, all that's left there is a teacher that might stay there working for a while or might not. They might quit and go somewhere else. But their higher purpose all of a sudden is removed. And all they have left is their own society. And if their society is broken, what is left to hope? How do you find hope in that environment?
But when we look at things like this, isn't the overall you're connected to humanity, right from wrong is usually distinguishable by a 5-year-old. These are just moral structures. We can't just teach people that, like, hey, these are the ways to be a good human being. This is right and wrong. I shouldn't kill you. I shouldn't attack you. I shouldn't steal from you. Do we necessarily need the religion to bring those? Or could 10 good human beings, regardless of ideological stance, you're this, I'm that, this, couldn't we all lay the foundation that we agree upon for good society and good people, and then in turn make sure those moral codes and standards are taught to children? Like where does the religious aspect tie in? Because I've seen religion removed from schools. I've seen it removed from politics. I've seen it, in God We Trust was on our money, and it's getting taken out more and more and more. And I'm watching the decay of society, and I'm watching the breakdowns. But I think it's more of a moral breakdown. You don't have a father in a home holding a child, not holding a child accountable, showing a child what a man in society should be, or a mother that you got to see this beautiful example of like resiliency and strength. And your mother was a fighter. And by that example, not by her words, but by who your mother was, it directly influenced you. So whether or not that came from, hey, because of religion, we have to follow this, or guys, this is how you live as good people. I would agree 1,000% that I think we need to get back to those. What is it, love? What is the basis of all of it? I mean, I feel like that is the basis of all of it. And because where does my love for humanity come from?
Well, I think when you talk about just a moral code, that's where it comes from, right? Like if love exists, why wouldn't I rob the local party store? Well, I actually love the guy that works there, and he's working really hard, trying to feed his family. It wouldn't do him any good if I robbed him, right? Why wouldn't I go over there and hurt that person's kids or whatever? Well, it's because I actually do love that person, have a care for them.
So how does religion tie into that? Because I agree with you 1,000%. Those are innate. Like if I love somebody and I care about them, or I'm able to look at something bigger than myself, I get to look at humanity as a collected consciousness, then, I guess I'm having trouble phrasing the question correctly because I don't mean it to sound like I'm undercutting it all. But it's like we all agree on these things. If you asked an Islamic believer, a Christian believer, a Catholic believer, and an atheist, right from wrong, generally, if they're all good people, they're going to give you the exact same answer.
I think that's probably the biggest difference. What I was going to say earlier when we talked about what's the difference between Christianity and all these other beliefs. Christianity is one of the only beliefs, if I'm not mistaken, the only one, that believes that you and I are called good because God called us good. Every other religion, you have to find enlightenment, you have to find peace, you have to journey through that. Christianity is the only one that salvation is offered freely by the blood of Jesus Christ. It's the only one. Every other religion, if I'm not mistaken, has some kind of penitentiary or some kind of restoration process that I have to go on a journey with. And Christianity comes with a no-cost obligation of saying Jesus gave his life for me, for my sins, so that I could have a relationship with the Father, so that I could have connection with my higher calling, my Father in heaven. And I think that's probably the biggest difference in that call, where my love will fail one day, right? One day, and people work with me and stuff. I'm not always the greatest guy I want to be, right? My wife married me a bunch of years, and she can tell you stories where I wasn't the greatest guy she wanted me to be. My love would have failed her. And honestly, there's plenty of women that would have, if you really talked to my wife about some of those years, that you'd be like, why didn't you leave? Like, why didn't you leave? I don't understand it. And she did see something in me, but she also had a love and understanding from God that she had to give me. And she knew that was her calling. And I think that was bigger than all she can do. So I think what breaks down in our world today is that if love depends on you or I, we're going to fail each other at some point or another. If love is dependent on what God does, that doesn't fail. It's ongoing.
So it's not the people that are carrying the love. It's coming from a higher power that you're tapped into, is what you're saying.
That's right.
That makes sense. So yeah, like I said, I think we're on to so much of the similar things. We just tie it to like a different overall meaning. But really, good people recognize good people, and leaders should recognize leaders, and we should have tons of love and acceptance in our heart for others that are like us or different than us. And like I said, I'm incredibly proud to have 242 in our community. I've been looking forward to this podcast the whole time. And I know that like we as a community, through a wide variety of leaders, are going to inspire change. Like I believe Brighton, I'm so thankful for this community, Livingston County in general. Like we're really a special spot on the map. And I'm sure a lot of people feel like that, but we have a lot of love in this community. We have a lot of great things, and it is almost our obligation to make sure we make as big of an impact as possible and spread that message outward, hopefully, so those ripples reach everyone. Because I could tell when you were speaking about Detroit, you grew up there. You know how hard it is there. I've gone down to the inner city and worked with the kids tons of times. I was sponsored by the UAW for a while because I was going down to inner city Detroit and working with kids that have never got to work with a professional martial artist. And we were going down on Saturdays and Sundays. It was called Saturday in the D. And we were training for a couple hours together. And these kids, they were lighting up, man. They were like fired up, hitting pads, and like that type of human connection, you don't realize how valuable that is until you put yourself in those situations. Right. So we need our leaders to do these things. And whether you do it because of this reason or that reason, do it. Get out in your communities, make a difference, you know. So I guess let's wrap up the podcast with this. For the people that are considering a church, or people that maybe are like, man, I've kind of been on a borderline for a while and I have some questions. I want to be a part of a good community. They watch the podcast today. They're like, man, I like that guy. I like his energy. You know, I can tell that he cares about other people. What is the best way for them to get started with you? How do they get to be a part of the community? What are the first steps? You know, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for that. You can find me all over social media, Joe Amini. You can find me wherever you want to find me, have a conversation. And I would say for you, to start a conversation means just tune in, just step into doors, come in, come how you are. I think one of the things that we can do sometimes, and even in your gym, this is probably true. One of the things we can do sometimes is we want to wait till we lose the weight, or we want to do all the work ahead of time. You're an alcoholic and you're like, I can't come to church until I stop drinking. You're sleeping around or whatever it is. And like, listen, don't wait till that gets fixed. Come just the way you are. You are loved and valued and cared for just the way you are. And come with all your questions. Come with these questions and come and say, hey, why does this matter? Like, explain to me, why does this matter? And let's keep having those conversations. And as we do, let's see what God says to you and how God walks you through a journey.
That was spot on. I can't tell you how many people would say, James, I want to do jiu-jitsu, but you know, first I gotta lose about 30 pounds. And I give the same result. What? No, you need to come in right now. Like, because the change happens because of the action. Mm-hmm. You take the action, and that's why you start to change. So when you're lost and you're confused and you're looking for answers, you take the action, and then the change will start to take place. You don't wait. Otherwise, I always say to my fighters, tomorrow never comes.
Nope.
Tomorrow never gets here. I'm going to start blah tomorrow. That tomorrow will never get here. You just have to say, if you want change in your life, today's the day I change. Today's the day I step forward into the future, into the unknown, into the scary, into the whole new world that might be uncomfortable. But today is the day.
That's right.
You know, and like that message is beautiful. And like I said, throughout this podcast, there are the amount of similarities between you and I dwarf the amount of differences that we have. It pales in comparison to the similarities because it is the same message about trying to bring out the best in other human beings. So again, I hope everybody enjoyed this podcast today. It's been a pleasure sitting with Joe. And, you know, I still have so much I'd love to talk to him about. Maybe we'll do a part 2. But other, like, people that are, you know, members at 242, please, like, reach out, you know, to me, what you enjoyed about the podcast, questions you have for me, questions you have for Joe. Like, we are leaders in this community, and we're going to continue to do our best for the people, and that's what matters the most. You know what I mean? And I'm never going to stand on a platform and say, like, listen, I am right on A, B, and C without question. I'm a human being that's like, how can I make the biggest impact? How can I help people? And I'm proud of Brighton.
Well, you know, I'll say this too, people 242 or whatever. What I can say is from what like Master Prez does with Andrew is what you've built here is unique and wonderful, and it's a community that's pretty amazing. Andrew loves coming. He comes 6 days a week with Master Prez here next door and really is inspired and challenged. And great teachers here and doing a great work here. So you are absolutely doing a great work and a valuable work in our community, because what this stands for, it's so much more than a mat. You know that. It's way more than this mat. It's bigger than that, and lives are changed because of it. So thank you for what you're doing.
In a weird way, I mean, 242 and MIA, we're doing the same thing. We're bringing people together. We don't really care about your differences. Like when you walk in the store, I don't care if you're rich, poor, white, black, old, young, skinny, fat. Does not matter. You're a human being that is trying to level up. And if you're a human being trying to get better, you will find that you will be surrounded by other people that want to see you go through that journey. It's exactly what you're doing. Mm-hmm. It's exactly what you're doing. So the more, and what we recognize is 242 and MIA and this and that, we're not really separate. We're the same community. So the more we level up our community and hold ourselves to great standards and we try to be the best people we can be, we're going to make a change. And you know what? Our kids are going to thank us for it. The future generations are going to thank us for it. And that's why we do the work that we do. So, Joe, it was truly an honor and a pleasure sitting with you today. And, the one last thing I want to say on the podcast is, I hope you know that, all of those conversations and questions I ask, they're not in any way, trying to cut down your beliefs or anything like that. And I value your honest, genuine responses to them. I think it's crucial.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this real quick, and we'll close with it. I agree with the same. James, I never heard anything at all like, why do you believe this? I heard genuine questions. We'll hopefully answer for some of you guys, some genuine answers to what I believe and what James believe, and I really respect it. Thanks for having me on this podcast, man. It's been fun.
Not a problem. We'll wrap this thing up.